Ready?
Ready. Yes.
Go for it. Hi, everyone. We are back today for a podcast connecting to India once again. And interesting because I've been talking to a few organizations out there. So today I'm here with Abhik. Is joining us from Teach for India, which is an organization that is quite interesting. It's focused on education, but I will let him talk a little bit about it. Um, I must admit I'm quite curious about today's conversation, and reasons for that is probably like you heard the previous podcast. I have quite a lot of friends in India. I have been in India quite a lot of times because of work, and I know that there is a big gap. Well, I would say there is a big deviation between some high education places and then other places where it's much harder to have access to education. And I think I'm very interested to know how are you guys doing it, and what is the result you're getting it. So as always, let us know who you are. Give us a few seconds introduction or minutes, up to you, so we all know you and the people that is listening also gets to know you.
Thank you so much. It's so good to be in conversation with you. My name is Abhik. I did the Teach for India Fellowship when it was founded 10 years ago in Bombay, inspired by 30 years of work that Teach for America did, and really proud to be a part of a 54 country network of people doing the similar work of just taking young people into low income classrooms and inspiring the children there to change their lives outcomes, and really with the hope that if you can afford every child an excellent education, so many wonderful things can happen at so many levels, right? For the level of the child, their family, their community, their state, the country, and then perhaps even the world. So really the entire network of Teach for countries work with this singular agenda of taking excellent education to every single child in the geographies they work in. My work at Teach for India started 10 years ago. I got 60 kids in a grade 4 classroom in Bombay, all of whom came from a nearby low income, very under resourced community, and spent the next 2 years with them, really changing a lot of their own internal dialogues of what's possible, taking their own dreams and turning them into far more ambitious ones. And with the tools of academics, with the tools of mindsets, with exposure, with access to spaces and people that they'd not necessarily have gotten. And we've been doing that for the past 10 years. And at the end of it, we've seen that not only have 1 million kids had these opportunities, but 3,000 young people like myself have gone through these 2 years in a classroom, changing our lives, of course, because it's such a difficult thing to do, but also changing the lives of so many children.
Let's speak those numbers. So you said 1 million, and I remember
Yes.
I'm coming from Portugal where we have a population of 10 million, so it's like equivalent of 10% of the Portuguese population. So 1 million children went through this program, and 3,000, you said 3,000
Yes.
younger people like you were, or you are still,
Well, I'm
uh,
not young anymore.
um, went through this experience of teaching the kids in a different location. But explain us the concept. And I know that this is a worldwide thing, is the Teach for two countries, but we are now talking about the Indian one. Explain us how does this work so people understand exactly what you're talking about.
Absolutely. So the crisis in India is, well, actually the opportunity in India is some 300 odd million children in the country. And we don't look at them as opportunities of amazing things that they can do if they had access to excellent education. That would make it 300 million opportunities for the country to really take it to another level. In the past 10 years, the 3,000 people who've been in classrooms have impacted personally 32,000 children. But after we graduate from our classrooms and we go out into the world, our collective impact of doing things at various levels of the education system are manifold. So, for example, my co-teacher Saurav taught 60 kids in a fourth grade classroom. Today, as the CEO of another really big education NGO, he reaches out to 9,600 children. Similarly, Tarun, who did the fellowship in 2009, impacted 40 kids in a classroom. And today, as the leader of a public policy outfit, he ensures that close to 20,000 children get access to education. So in our little ways, in the 2 years that we spent in the classroom, we impacted a group of kids. And then when we've gone out into the world after our fellowship as alumni, we've stayed connected to this inequity that education faces and are doing various things to impact children in all the different things we do, whether it's with the government, whether it's with other schools, whether it's with teacher training, whether it's with technology in education, whether it's with policies that we're helping the government think through, whether it's with arts and empowerment of communities. In everything that we do, we build a connection to children and impact children in our country and give them the access that they really, really deserve to unleash their potential.
One of the, I wouldn't call it problem, but I would say it's one of the biggest challenges you still have in India is the density, right? And the population growth. That I think your governments are probably doing some things that are having some results, but you still have a lot of children, and you still have a big gap.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right. How do you feel this program has been closing this gap? What's your view on that? And of course, you have a biased opinion, but that's okay.
No, it's a really excellent one, right? Because just by default of being a country with so many children, we've seen the government do several good things. We've increased the level of enrollment in schools. More girls are in schools now than ever before. We have far more communities with access to schools in urban cities. So we've done several good things for education in our country. We've taken the lessons of this large dividend of population and really explored things which we could make it better for children. What we're still seeing a gap in, and I think Teach for India has really had a significant support to this, is the quality of education they get once they are in school. So despite the fact that we've got more children in school, more girls in school, more schools which are accessible for urban slum communities, we still see that the number of teachers per children is really, really, really little, right? Like we have one teacher managing 250 children, for example. Mm-hmm. And Teach for India's support has been to find schools which have a dearth of teachers and place fellows in them so that we can then support the teachers and the school community to give excellent education to children. We've seen that a lot of rote learning happens in classrooms because, well, there's just no time, right? Like if a teacher has to teach 200 kids, the person can't really give them the quality of intervention that the children deserve. Mm-hmm. And compounded to this is the enormous numbers of different things that teachers have to do. They have to go and do election duty. They have to fill bureaucratic papers day in and day out. They have to do other things which their officers tell them to do. And that takes away from instructional time, which is where Teach for India comes in and says that we'll only go into schools which have a dearth of teachers. We'll place high quality individuals such as Teach for India fellows into these classrooms. And by being change makers in our own little classrooms, we inspire the other classrooms to get into this vision of what's possible if all children are given an opportunity. And
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. And you know what's been interesting is that a lot of schools have seen the value in that. Headmistresses, headmasters have seen the value of having people who are just not teachers, but are inspired to make a difference in their communities, come into spaces such as these low-income municipal schools, low-income private schools in our communities, and impact some format of change. And we've been able to do this consistently for 10 years and demonstrate that when you have caring adults in service of children, really so many things can change.
Yeah, I definitely, there is something I like, well, there's a lot of things I like in your project, but there is something I like, but on the other hand, I also ask what is the feeling that so let's talk about the student or is that they are new graduated, right? So the newly graduated fellows, as you call it, um, they finish their graduation somewhere, and then they do a 2-year programs, as I understand, in the place where there is a lack of teachers. What kind of experiences, and you have been there, so you can talk in the first person. What kind of learnings and experiences are those young people getting, and you got, that help you later to do things that you just described that others have done that are
Yeah.
helping thousands of people these days? But what is the experience that you get and the learnings you get that gets you to be in that level of, I don't know,
Wow.
knowledgeable
Yeah.
experience?
Thank you. That's at one level a really simple question because I've done it and I can tell you from my own personal experience. But I'll break it up into two parts. I think we've seen over the past 10 years, 3,000 people graduate from the program. Where do these people come from? Who are these Teach for India fellows? And what we've seen through the data that we get from the applications, every year we get close to 18,000 applications, and we end up choosing 400, 500 young people to go into these classrooms and teach full time for 2 years. I think we've seen civil society really come alive. We've seen college students who are graduating from the top colleges in the country say that, hey, you know what? I'm going to go into a classroom. I'm going to experience what it really means to solve a problem which impacts all of us as a country. And then I'm going to proceed with my life and take the learnings from these classrooms into wherever I go. And I'll give you an example. When I taught in my low income classroom for 2 years, I'd come from the corporate world. And I was so used to resources being free flowing, right? Like when you work for a big corporation in India, resources are not a constraint. Access to networks is not a constraint. But the minute you enter a low income classroom, that space just omits a lot of things. You don't have resources. You don't have the mindsets which are progressive. You don't have children who want to study. You don't have systems which sort of empower you to bring the change you want to bring in. And through these 2 years, you really learn simple things like grit, how you need to show up every day, be consistent in what you do to win trust, to build relationships, to ensure that your children have access and opportunities which you enjoyed. Your privilege starts getting questioned. Why was I born in a zip code which afforded me all these privileges, and this group of children who I'm interacting with daily don't have that? It's just that the PIN code changed. And when you start thinking about that, you say that, well, what do I do to pass it forward? So you're building empathy through practice. So I feel all these experiences really teach you things which perhaps an MBA class sometimes might not be able to teach you, which perhaps a corporate job could not perhaps teach you as profoundly as being in a low income classroom teaches you. Simple things like when you see violence in a classroom next to you, how do you acknowledge your privilege and still inspire the other teacher through example, not through violence as a result, as a response, but through example that, hey, you know what, you can get your class to sit quietly and be engaged if you do these three things. So you're thinking innovatively, you're putting on your sense of possibility hat and thinking, what could I do to showcase that you don't need to beat a kid to get them engaged. I feel that all of us learn these things very firsthand. It's very difficult to be in a classroom which is under-resourced, where it's hot, where you've got 60 kids stuffed into a tiny room, and you're expected to ensure that they bridge the gap, that enormous achievement gap that poverty is sort of put on them in the 2 years that you're with them, and prepare them for a life where they can, take their families out of poverty. I feel putting ourselves in these spaces really teaches us how to be resourceful, teaches us about relationship building, teaches us values of sense of possibility, of approaching every moment with love. It's so easy to lose your temper. It's so easy to get disillusioned. It's so easy to get demotivated because results are not quick. Kids don't speak English when you enter the classroom, but when you leave them 2 years later, they're talking about Henry V and about the Sensex, right? It's being consistent and turning up every day to build that level of that level of trust with the children, with the school community, with the families of these children. So many of the children have to work before they come to school. How do you impress upon their parents that, hey, this is a fighting chance? Educating them is a fighting chance for them to move themselves out of poverty. So I feel that it's such a multi-stakeholder environment where the children are one of the stakeholders to the countless other people that you're trying to demonstrate that change is possible. But you have to be persistent. You have to turn up every day. You have to approach this work that you do with love and patience.
Um, so let me pick one of the last things you said, and everything you
So
said is relevant, but there is one thing that I think is quite, from a sociological perspective, family is the first, or is the biggest contributor in the first years of how do you perceive the world, and how do you deal with the world as we know it, and how do you understand the world as you know it, right? um,
yeah,
and you said it. I think it says pretty much everything. A lot of these kids, they are not mentally structured, prepared, or taught to become a successful person. They have been taught to go to school, get out of it as quick as possible. We got to work. There's something to do. We need to do something at home, or we need to do something in whatever job you have, because that's the day-to-day challenge they have.
yeah.
Um, so Teach for India, and I'm pretty sure other organizations as well, you are tackling the education in the classroom, but what kind of measures are you also having to help the parents around to get out of that trap of, if you don't think about it now, you are telling your kids that they won't be able to do anything else in life. And we'll talk a bit more later how important is an educated children in countries like India, where sometimes they are the ones holding the entire family, right? In a large family in one place.
Yes. No, that's such a fair reflection, right? And I feel that education really is the fundamental lever which makes an equitable society. And it's quite shocking that we failed our children in our communities, right? Like 50% of grade 5 children can't read a grade 2 text. 50% of uh, grade 5 kids can't do a division or a subtraction problem in our country. And that's a huge disservice we're doing our children. And the fact that a child is born into a community and that determines the type of life they have is just quite shocking to hear and to live in every day. And I feel as an organization, what Teach for India has really done is, while we place fellows in classrooms, the work really begins with the community as well, right? Like, how do you showcase to parents the possibilities of what education can do for their children? How do you in turn educate parents? How do you in turn empower communities of women women of mothers of the children that we work with, that if they know about healthcare, if they know about financial literacy, it'll help them make sure that their girls stay in school longer. It'll help them make sure that their girls don't get married off at an early age. And I feel that's the colossal work of what Teach for India fellows are tasked to do. Not only do we have to, get the academic achievements of our children high, because that's really the only way that they'll be able to access higher education.
Mm-hmm.
We also need to continually work with communities, right? And we have to work with families and ensure that from little things like, I had a kid in my class whose father was a butcher, and she'd come every day to my class. Her name is Mehek, and she'd fall asleep. And for the first 3 months, I was perplexed and blaming myself, saying that my class is horrible. I'm a terrible teacher. I'm not being able to, engage her. And it was always about me. Till one day, my program manager said, why don't you walk home with this kid? Why don't you go into the community where she lives and see her family, meet her family, go and see where she sleeps, where she reads, where she eats. And when I went to her home, I realized that her father's a butcher in a slum community in Bombay. And her house, where he cuts the meat, is steaming with flies. So the poor child doesn't have a single space in her own home to sleep without flies buzzing around her. And the safest place, the cleanest place is my classroom. And so she uses the time in school to sleep. How do you solve a problem like that? How do you sensitize parents to say that, no, you can't smoke dope in your own home so that the child comes to school and sleeps? No, you can't be violent with your family members because your child sees that and perpetuates that in school. No, you can't be, you can't be fueling systems and cycles of abuse in a variety of way that your child is is bound to not be able to pay attention in class or to achieve his or her own potential. I think it just begins when you start getting yourself involved with communities. And so when you walk home with children and you see the lives they lead, you see the work their parents do, you sort of start really empathizing in a different way, where you say that your challenges are so graphic, your challenges are so pronounced, that the work you do in your classroom has to account for that. But at the same level, you hold a sense of excellence. So I remember I would never let my kids give me excuses like I didn't have electricity, I didn't get a, I didn't, I had to go work, and then I was too tired to do my homework. I had to stand in a kilometer long line to get drinking water, and that's why I couldn't finish my project. And it would be easier for me to say, oh, poor thing, oh, look how difficult their lives are, and pity them. But then, would I be honest in the work that I'm doing them? If I was going to cut them slack, how would they know the importance of excellence? How would they know the importance of accountability? And I think you can't have this conversation in isolation with the children. You have to involve the parents. And this goes much beyond that, right? You have to involve the other people in the community. You have to involve the other stakeholders in the lives of the children. So I feel it's education for me, education for the child, and really education for anyone who comes in touch with the work we do.
Um, so I went to university. I made my MBA. I work in the corporate world, but if you
Okay.
put me in the classroom, I don't know what to do. How do you prepare your fellows to get to it? Because there is a lot of, it's more than a teacher, right? It's a psychologist, it's a sociologist,
Yes.
it's a therapist, it's a teacher. And by the
Many
way,
different.
for the record, and I will say it for the record several times, teachers should be the best paid job in the
Oh, I
world.
100%
We
agree with you
shouldn't
on that.
prevent them to do their job because we keep on underpay them and underrate them in terms of relevance, just for the record.
I
Um,
completely agree with that.
so taking that in consideration and assuming that one day we will give them the respect they deserve because they are preparing. I usually, there is this, is not for me, but a guy says 20, the children are 20% of the world, but 100% of the future. Teachers are preparing this 20% to become the future of our world. And as long as we don't understand that the impact of our decisions, corporate, governmental policies, are impacting the future by simply affecting the most important phase of the children, which is education, irrespective of educational model. We can talk about which ones are better, which ones are worse, and that's not relevant to me. Whatever model we pick, teachers that are picked to do that, they should be given the right conditions to do that. Anyway, back to my question. Otherwise, we're just going to get very philosophical about it. How do you prepare your fellows for that? Because it's a tough work.
Yeah, I'm going to quickly go get to this part, but I completely agree. For economies that don't value education, when it's just a number on a budget sheet, that's where teachers are underpaid, right? And the minute you start valuing the opportunity that these 300 million children represent, you'll immediately start seeing the value in getting the best teachers by paying them fair wages, right? And I feel that the only way to do that is when you say that, when you acknowledge that teachers do more than teach, when you acknowledge that teachers do more than just work inside a classroom. For us, it's really, really, really amazing to see the kind of support we get. So our in-service fellows go through a 6-week rigorous residential training program. We call it Institute. And this is really like the laboratory in which we are immersed in everything from pedagogy to psychology to how do you work with communities to social work. And what's ingrained in us is excellence. What's ingrained in us is whatever you teach. if you're teaching a grade 2 textbook which the government's prescribed in that particular classroom, how do you take that textbook and turn it into an opportunity for exploration? How do you take standards which a private school peer of your student would be expected to accomplish in the school year, right? And that's what we're taught. We're taught to take whatever exists within the school curriculum system and take it to a level of excellence which really impacts the child that's learning it. We're also given this incredible resource called a program manager, and they've been teachers in the past themselves. So they know the trials and tribulations that we'll face in our classrooms. So they'll be the ones who tell me that, okay, if your kid is sleeping in your class for 3 months, what are you doing wrong? You've done everything. You've given the child worksheets, you've given the child extra intervention, you've spoken to their parents. I think the thing that you need to do is go and see where the child sleeps at night at their home. You need to go and see what sort of community they come from. Is it a noisy community? Is there an alcohol shop close by to the child's house? Is there violence, street violence where the child comes from? And they become our mentors, they become our guides, they become the social workers who really push us beyond our comfort zones to say that, okay, you're having a problem about achievement in your classroom. What are the 10 things you could do differently? You're not being able to get resources. What are the different places you can access it from? So we get program managers which support us across the 2 years. And then across the 10 years, we've seen there's so many people doing this excellent work around the country, and we learn from them. We have so many of our alumni who are now going back into communities and doing work, and they become partners in teaching our in-service fellows excellent things to do to overcome challenges. So I feel that there's multiple resources we have access to. Our fellows get the 6-week training, they get a program manager, they get access to a network of educators. And now we've started playing with this really simple but very profound idea that how can your children become partners in solution finding, right? Like, how do you work in partnership with students to figure out how you can change and reimagine what a classroom should look like, what a school should look like? And that's something that we're really investing a lot of time and energy and resources understanding, that if we work in partnership with children, we can really accelerate the speed at which we can change and reimagine an entire education system.
It is a quick one. Do you also get applicants from abroad, from different places, or it's mostly India?
Well, Indians who live abroad and want to come back to the country and serve, yes, we do. But for anyone who's of a different nationality, I think there's 54 countries which have a similar model to teach for India.
Yeah, but I meant, do you also get the people,
We do get applicants from abroad, yeah. Of Indian origin.
Yeah, so India for India. So I must admit, I like the concept that it is not just with Teach for India, with the organizations. It's not that I think if you help, doesn't matter your color, where you come from, but I like the fact that we empower local communities and local people to handle the issues and the problems that they have in their own country. It's not that I don't think it's always good to help. It's fine, doesn't matter where you come, but we have this concept, and it's more to Africa, right? Where the white guy coming from Europe comes and saves the world and helps because we are just smarter than everyone else and we have much more money. We got to stop that, right? There is a lot of good and quality on the locals, and we need to empower those because they can do the same. There is no need to have a guy from Germany to teach in a classroom in India, right?
Right.
So
that's the beauty of this large network of Teach for countries, right? Where you're really trying to get your brightest, your most committed, your most ambitious young people to say, hey, can I stop and look and acknowledge my own privilege and the excellent education that I received and all the opportunities that came along with it? And can I stop for 2 years and say, let me pay it forward?
Yeah. We are coming to an end in terms of time. And if you heard my podcast, you gotta get your message prepared for me. But before I get to that, there is one last question.
Sure.
When you go into a classroom and you have all those children that come from the various places that, in the most of the cases, are lacking quite very basics. You told the story of the kid from the butcher. How do you get yourself mentally prepared? And don't tell me the program manager, yourself, to not get psychologically impacted and drown to those children's problems. Because I think I would just fall in tears every single day, and I would try to go and just take the parent out of their house, because I would get emotionally attached. And I know, so how do you do that?
Gosh, I mean, the easy answer is there's a lot of tears. I mean, in the last 10 years of working with children across India, Bangladesh, the communities in Slovakia, I've just been awed by the amount of resilience that children have, especially children who live in conflict and children who live in poverty. And I think the only thing that prepares me for all the gray and all the truth and all the sadness and all the heartache is just the opposite. It's the stories of hope. It's the stories of sunshine. It's the stories of survival. It's the stories of excellence that emerge from these communities. And I think, how could I not, right? Like, and I feel that every time I'm confronted with a story which breaks my heart, that I always look for a story that makes me beam that this was possible for a child, whether it was through something that the child did or something that the child accessed or something that the child aspired for. So I think the only way to prepare yourself is by acknowledging that people all over the world are inherently good. Everybody wants to help. Everybody wants to do good. And I really, really believe that. And I think the only way to fundamentally change anyone's perspective in supporting any child anywhere in the world is if you believe that the work you do really makes a difference to someone else and to yourself. I think if you can acknowledge the fact that you're changing while you're going through this experience, empowers you to do more of it. And I think that's been my big lesson in the past 10 years, that by putting myself in the center of their lives, I've changed as a person, I've transformed as an individual, and afforded a bit of it to them as well. And for every story of heartbreak, there are 10 stories of amazingness. And it's this juxtaposition of gray and sunshine, happiness and sadness, and all the things that come in between. Because these are two ends of the spectrum, but there's so much in between. I think that's what keeps me going.
Yeah, and there's a very way. There's a very nice. I still don't think I would be able to, but maybe I would. I don't know. Maybe I have to try.
Yeah, you absolutely will.
Yeah. So, give me your last message. Give me this statement, and it's not commercial, right? It's more. I like people to leave this conversation with food for thought, and our mission is to be empowered. It's not just to share your story, which is not just but it's a great story, but also to empower others to do the same. So, and I want them to leave this conversation with, well, man, and I probably they got it through all the conversation, but this last message is what I like people to take.
That's a lot of pressure, but I'm going to try. I think it's really, for me, a simple 2-letter word, which I think, I can't remember who said it, but they said, if you won the ovarian lottery, do you know what the ovarian lottery is? It basically means the pin code that you're born into, which determines the family that loves you and educates you. It determines the opportunities you had access to. And I feel that I won the ovarian lottery. Like, I'm sitting and having this, engaging in a conversation with you. I'm educated. I have a family. I have opportunities. And I feel when you win the ovarian lottery, the only thing that you must ask yourself is, what am I doing to pass it forward? And I feel that that's the message that I want to leave everyone with, saying that if you won the ovarian lottery, whether not through your economic status, but more from do you have a thinking mind? Do you have an able body? Do you have access and opportunities to things which a large percentage of our world doesn't have access to? What are you going to do to think about how to pass it forward? And we're smart enough to think of solutions. I mean, naturally, what comes to us are the problems. We always keep listing the problems of all the things that are going wrong. But I'm going to push people to think a little bit about what is the solution to this problem and what's in your locus of control. And I think if you can think of that, then you just begin passing it forward without realizing it.
Hope so. I truly hope so. My partner keeps saying that the society or the humankind sometimes looks to be lost. I have a hope that it is not, and we can do a lot more. So I that's the reason why we created this project, right? I think we have to start sharing goodness and positive messages, because the humankind can, and she believes as well. I'm just kidding, but um, we need to start thinking that.
Yeah.
And I usually tell this story. After last times I was in Bhubaneswar, I was talking to my team in there, and they were expecting me to talk about all the processes that we had to implement, and I gave them a session about social responsibility.
Absolutely. And it lies on all of us.
Yes, and the privileges we have to be in this situation.
Yeah.
Well,
How
it
could
is
we
paid,
not pass it forward?
educated. We need to pay back, and we need to
Absolutely.
give back.
Thank you.
Pleasure to talk to you, and
Absolute
I
pleasure.
really
My
hope that this gets to a lot of people, so everyone understands that we can all do a little bit more in education, which is something that we tend to forget sometimes.
all of us can do it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much too. Have a wonderful